Late one summer night, a group of friends gathered around a bonfire on the deserted shores of Blackwater Beach. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the choppy waves. Laughter and chatter filled the air as the flames danced and crackled, illuminating their faces with a warm light. Among the group was Sarah, a local who had grown up hearing tales of the beach's haunted past. She had never believed the stories, dismissing them as old wives' tales meant to scare children. But tonight, she felt an inexplicable unease, a chill that ran down her spine despite the warmth of the fire. "Tell us a scary story, Sarah," one of her friends urged, sensing her discomfort. Sarah hesitated, but then decided to share the tale she had heard so many times before. "All right," she began, her voice steady but low. "Have you heard of the Blackwater Curse?" Her friends leaned in, their faces a mix of curiosity and anticipation. Sarah continued, her eyes reflecting the flickering flames. "Years ago, a fisherman named Thomas lived in the nearby village. He was a solitary man, spending most of his days at sea. One stormy night, he didn't return. His wife, Eliza, worried sick, ventured out to search for him despite the villagers' warnings. She combed the beach until dawn, but Thomas was nowhere to be found." Sarah paused, glancing at the dark, restless ocean. Days turned into weeks, and hope faded. Then one evening, Eliza saw a figure standing by the water's edge. It was Thomas, or at least it looked like him. She ran to him, but as she got closer, she realized something was terribly wrong. His eyes were vacant, and his skin was cold and clammy. He reached out to her, whispering her name in a voice that was not his own. Sarah's friends shuddered, the shadows cast by the fire making the night feel even darker. Eliza tried to run, but the thing that looked like Thomas grabbed her. She was never seen again. Since that night, it's said that the spirits of Thomas and Eliza haunt Blackwater Beach, searching for souls to drag into the depths with them. Just as Sarah finished her story, a gust of wind extinguished the fire, plunging the beach into darkness. The friends gasped, their eyes wide with fear. Sarah's heart raced as she fumbled for a flashlight. "Okay, that was creepy," one of her friends said, trying to laugh but failing to hide his nervousness. As Sarah turned on the flashlight, its beam cut through the night, revealing the vast, empty shoreline. The friends decided it was time to leave and packed up their things hastily. They made their way back to the parking lot, the flashlight their only guide. Suddenly, Sarah felt a cold hand grip her ankle. She screamed and pointed the flashlight downward, but there was nothing there. Her friends rushed to her side, their faces pale. "Let's get out of here," someone whispered urgently. They quickened their pace, but the sense of dread only grew stronger. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore seemed to echo with ghostly whispers. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that something was following them. As they reached the parking lot, they saw their cars parked in a row, untouched. But something caught Sarah's eye, wet footprints leading from the beach to their vehicles, too large and misshapen to be human. "Did you see that?" one of her friends asked, his voice trembling. Sarah nodded, her mouth dry. "Let's go. Now." They piled into their cars and sped away, not daring to look back. The ride home was silent, each of them lost in their own thoughts, haunted by the night's events. Later that night, as Sarah lay in bed, she couldn't shake the feeling of cold fingers gripping her ankle. She glanced out her window at the moonlit beach in the distance, and for a split second, she thought she saw a figure standing by the water's edge, watching her with vacant eyes. She quickly shut the blinds and pulled the covers over her head, but the chill remained. The story of the Blackwater Curse was no longer just a tale to her. It was a terrifying reality, one that would haunt her for the rest of her life. On the remote coast of Blackwater Beach, There was an old, dilapidated lighthouse known as Grim Point Light. Locals whispered about it being cursed, a place where strange and terrible things had happened over the years. Few dared to go near it, especially at night. One summer evening, a group of adventurous friends, Jake, Emily, Sam, and Lisa, decided to explore the lighthouse. They had heard the stories but dismissed them as mere legends. Armed with flashlights and a sense of daring, they set out as the sun dipped below the horizon. The path to Grim Point Light was treacherous, overgrown with weeds and lined with jagged rocks. By the time they reached the lighthouse, the sky was pitch black, and the only sounds were the crashing waves and the distant call of a lone seabird. "Let's get this over with," Jake said, trying to mask his unease. He pushed open the creaking door, and they stepped into the darkness. The air inside was musty, and the floor was littered with debris. As they shone their flashlights around, they saw faded wallpaper peeling off the walls and broken furniture scattered about. An eerie silence hung over the place, amplifying their every step. "Do you guys hear that?" Emily whispered. The others stopped and listened. Faintly, they heard the sound of footsteps coming from above. "It's probably just the wind," Sam said, though he didn't sound convinced. They decided to climb the spiral staircase to the top of the lighthouse. Each step seemed to echo louder than the last, and the air grew colder as they ascended. Halfway up, Lisa paused and shined her flashlight on the wall. There, scrawled in what looked like dried blood, were the words, "Help me." "Okay, this is getting too creepy," Lisa said, her voice shaking. "Let's keep going," Jake urged. "We're almost there." When they reached the top, they found the lantern room empty, except for an old, rusted lantern hanging from the ceiling. The room offered a panoramic view of the dark ocean, but it provided no comfort. Instead, it felt as though the darkness outside was pressing in on them. Suddenly, the lantern began to swing on its own, creaking with each movement. The friends exchanged fearful glances. "Did you do that?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "No," Jake replied, his eyes wide. "Let's get out of here." As they turned to leave, the door slammed shut, trapping them inside. Panic set in as they tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. "Help! Someone help us!" Sam shouted, banging on the door. Then, a chilling laugh echoed through the room, and the temperature dropped even further. The friends huddled together, their breaths visible in the cold air. "Who's there?" Jake demanded, trying to sound brave. The only response was the creaking of the lantern and the sound of footsteps approaching from the staircase. The door flew open, and they were faced with a figure cloaked in darkness, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. "Leave this place," the figure hissed, its voice a blend of many. "Leave and never return." Without hesitation, the friends bolted down the stairs, stumbling and tripping in their haste. They burst out of the lighthouse and ran back down the path, not stopping until they reached the safety of their car. Breathless and trembling, they drove away, glancing back to see the lighthouse standing ominously against the night sky. The figure watched them from the top, its glowing eyes following them until they were out of sight. From that night on, none of them spoke of what they had seen. But the memory of Grim Point Light and the terror they felt remained etched in their minds, a haunting reminder of the horrors that lurked in the shadows of Blackwater Beach. Years later, they heard news that the lighthouse had collapsed during a storm. Some said it was just nature taking its course, but Jake, Emily, Sam, and Lisa knew better. They knew that something evil had been released that night, something that would haunt Blackwater Beach forever. In a small coastal town, there was a secluded stretch of sand known as Whispering Beach. The locals avoided it, especially after dark, because of the unsettling whispers that seemed to come from the waves themselves. The legend told of a shipwreck long ago, where all the passengers had perished and their restless spirits haunted the beach. One autumn evening, a group of college friends, Mark, Sophie, Brian, and Jenna, decided to visit Whispering Beach. They were skeptics, convinced the stories were just meant to scare children and tourists. Armed with flashlights, they made their way to the beach under the light of a full moon. The wind howled through the dunes, and the sea crashed violently against the shore. The air was thick with the scent of salt and decay. As they walked along the beach, Sophie suddenly stopped. "Do you hear that?" she asked. They all paused and listened. Faintly, carried on the wind, were the unmistakable sounds of whispers. It was as if a crowd of people were murmuring just out of sight, their voices blending into an eerie chorus. "It's probably just the wind," Mark said, though he didn't sound convinced. They continued walking until they came across the remains of an old, weather-beaten lifeboat half buried in the sand. Brian shined his flashlight on it, revealing faded letters that spelled out SS Mariner. "This must be from the shipwreck," Jenna said, her voice trembling. As they inspected the lifeboat, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. It sounded like a woman's voice, desperate and pleading. "Help us. Please, help us." Sophie shuddered. "I don't like this. Let's go back." But before they could move, a dense fog rolled in from the sea, enveloping them in a cold, damp shroud. Visibility dropped to almost nothing, and the whispers became screams, agonized, terrified screams. "Run!" Mark shouted. They tried to flee, but the fog disoriented them. Shapes moved within the mist, dark figures that seemed to reach out with ghostly hands. Jenna tripped and fell, and when Brian stopped to help her, he saw a pale, skeletal hand emerge from the sand and grasp her ankle. "Jenna!" he yelled, pulling her free. They both stumbled back, horrified, as more hands emerged from the ground, clawing and grasping at the air. Sophie screamed as a shadowy figure loomed in front of her, its eyes hollow and its mouth open in a silent scream. She felt a chill pass through her, freezing her in place. Mark grabbed her arm, dragging her away from the figure. "We have to get out of here!" They ran blindly through the fog, the screams and whispers pursuing them. Just as they thought they would never escape, they broke through the edge of the fog and found themselves back at the entrance to the beach. The fog dissipated as quickly as it had appeared, and the whispers faded into the night. Breathless and shaking, they collapsed onto the ground. None of them spoke for several minutes, the horror of what they had experienced sinking in. "We need to tell someone about this," Brian said finally, his voice hoarse. "No one will believe us," Mark replied. "They'll just think we're making it up." They agreed never to speak of that night again, but each of them was haunted by the memories of Whispering Beach. Sophie couldn't sleep without hearing the desperate whispers. Jenna developed an irrational fear of the ocean, and Brian and Mark couldn't shake the image of those skeletal hands reaching out from the sand. Years later, Sophie returned to the beach alone, hoping to find some closure. As she stood on the shore, the whispers began again, soft and pleading. She closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. "We're sorry," she whispered back. "We couldn't save you." The wind seemed to carry her words out to sea, and for a moment the whispers stopped. But as Sophie turned to leave, she heard one final whisper, so close it seemed to be right next to her ear. "Join us!" She ran from the beach, vowing never to return. The legend of Whispering Beach lived on, and the spirits of the SS Mariner remained, forever trapped between the sea and the shore, whispering their torment to those who dared to listen.